Welcome again to Dinner Time Devotions here at the chapel. We're so glad that you've decided to join us. We're in the midst of a series called Overcomers on the weekend as we talk about how to overcome in our faith and the circumstances that we find in front of us that may seem very overwhelming. Last weekend we talked about how there are different opponents and obstacles out there in front of us. Walking in darkness is one of those. And the other one is the pressures and the allure of the world. I was looking up a list of some of the things that people enjoy most about the world that God has given us. And in that list it says ice cream, porch swings, beach days, laughter. The list goes on to say ice cream, children, nature, adventures, and finally ice cream. For me, that would be mint chocolate chip if you are wondering. There's so many things about this world that are just incredible, especially in Indiana when one day it's 70 degrees and the next day it's 3 to 5 inches of snow. Just kind of pick your poison there. Which day would you prefer? There's so many amazing things about the world, but when we think about the world and we hear that word, we either think of one, planet Earth, nature and all the incredible things that constituted and how God created it. The other thing that we think of usually is just humankind, the whole world. In fact, a famous verse in the Bible is referring to that in John 3:16. For God so loved the world. He's not referring to planet Earth. He's referring to you and I and all of humankind. But in the letter that's entitled 1 John, he has a different and third definition of it, which isn't planet Earth. It isn't humankind. It's referring to human culture. And in many ways, human culture is in opposition to God. In fact, the Bible adds a third and says that human culture in many ways is influenced by the evil one. That there are values, that there are priorities, and that there are beliefs that exist in our culture that exclude God, that doesn't want Him to be any part of what they are doing. There is a new moral and spiritual realm that is out there that is trying to draw us away from Him. And John, as he was talking about this in 1 John chapter 2, he gives us a great definition of what he means by the world when he says it. In 1 John chapter 2, verse 16, he says this, "For all that is in the world," and then he stops and says, this is what the world is, and it's three things: the desires of the flesh, the desires of the eyes, and the pride of life. And what he says, those things, that is not from the Father, but is from the world. So what is the desires of the flesh, the desires of the eyes, and the desires, or the pride of life? The desires of the flesh in many ways are those things that we do to be able to experience pleasure. In fact, one word that one may use is hedonism, which is just this viewpoint, this value, this way of looking at life is that I'm about trying to experience pleasure, and that there's a part of the world that's saying if it feels good, go after it and do it. The second one is the desire of the eyes. Those are things where there's something that you see out there that you want. In fact, if there was an ism that we would use here, it's probably materialism. There's things that we want to buy, that we want to achieve, and we want to own. The third thing he says here is the pride of life. And this is just basically the mindset that I am number one. If there's an ism to this, it would be egoism. So when it comes to these three things, the desires of the flesh, the desires of the eyes, and the pride of life, what we're really talking about today in our culture is this pull from the world to engage into hedonism, to experience pleasure, materialism, to want more, and egoism, that it's all about me. But John in the next verse helps us to know that we are not to love that. We are not to give our lives to those things, but we overcome by not loving it and doing something else. He says this in verse 17, "And the world is passing away along with its desires, but whoever does the will of God abides forever." One of the key things in knowing is that egoism and materialism and hedonism, those are all passing away. Those will all be gone someday. These things that the world is saying, pursue that, that's where happiness, those will all be gone. One of the core things that we believe as Christians is that one day Jesus will return and He will set up His kingdom. And all of these other ideologies, all these other beliefs, all of these things that try to draw us away from God, they will be gone. And any time we entered into those, it really is just empty. There's nothing about it that is going to pass on into eternity. They are extremely temporal. But one of the great church fathers by the name of Augustine, when looking at this verse, he lived in the 400s AD, a long time ago, he said these words. He said, "Hold fast to Christ. For you He became temporal, so that you might partake of eternity." And he says that by looking at this verse, and at the very end of it, it says, "But whoever does the will of God abides forever." So what does it mean to overtake and to overcome the pressures of this world? He says simply this is to do God's will. Because all of those things are going to pass away. And I believe what that means is this. If all of those things are going to pass away, whenever we are confronted with these desires, we look at those and we're going to say, I'm going to pass on that. I am going to pass on pleasures that don't have anything to do with pleasing God. I am going to pass on those possessions that are more wants than they are needs. And I am going to pass on the pride of life where it is all about me and putting me above not only other people, but above God. I hope that as we look at these very important verses, that the desires and the allure of the world become apparent to us in our lives. And that we will be a church, we will be a people that will say, with respect to those things, I'm going to pass on that.
It's my privilege to give the message this weekend at the chapel, and we're doing a series on being overwhelmed or being an overcomer. There's quite a choice. Do you want to be overwhelmed or do you want to be an overcomer? We're going to look at the life of Joseph and say, how did he overcome such frustrating, unjust, unfair things? And how can we learn from him how God wants us to be an overcomer?